living through a silent epidemic of loneliness, which I
Yeah.
know sounds like a lot, but I really think that we're across multiple generations, we're being separated more and more, and we're isolated more and more. And so, even though it's the paradox of
Wow.
having more access to information and having more access to tools that connect us, ironically, we end up feeling more isolated than we ever have before, in a time where families used to live together in one unit,
Wow.
in ways that, towns used to stay together, right?
Hey parents, welcome back to Parenting on Purpose, your podcast for finding purpose in the parenting journey and enjoying the journey. I'm really excited today, guys. I actually have a mutual friend of my husband and mine here today, Vadim. Vadim, how are you?
Hey, Caitlin, good to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm
Oh, I'm
awesome.
so happy to have you. You're incredible. My husband and I just got to spend a weekend with Vadim a few weeks ago, and it always is so nice to have a dad's perspective on the show. It's always so nice to just see what other people are doing out there. So I'm really excited to introduce you to our audience. So Vadim comes from the biotech space. He was actually an executive at the very large biotech industry. For our health, we cannot say which company that was. Just kidding. And now he's moved into a co-founder role for Blossom and Beam, which is an all-natural cosmetics and health company that he has actually co-founded with his beautiful 11-year-old daughter. So that is such an inspiring and cool story, very similar to mine and Shekinah's. So I'm really excited to chat and get into that story. Before I do that, I do want to have one housekeeping item. Guys, if you guys enjoy this content, I would love for you to check out the link down below. We are supported by our Mighty Morsels branch, which is our all natural, high protein, high plant-based protein, and low sugar kid snack. And we're so excited to be able to bring you this content and get incredible speakers like Vadim here to give us some information. So if you enjoyed the content and you're looking for good, healthy options for your kids that are going to keep them nice and fueled and ready for fun adventures, check out Mighty Morsels. We'd really appreciate the support there down below. All right, Vadim, I'm excited. So why don't we just jump into it? Tell us a little bit about your story, your background, how you and your beautiful daughter came to develop this brand, and we'll just have fun and kind of play from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Caitlin, I'm super excited to get our package of Mighty Morsels. I'm counting the days. So I think it's just such an awesome idea, because I can't tell you how many times me and my daughter been on long hikes, right? And I end up bringing a ham and cheese sandwich that's all like melted by the time we get up to the top and stuff like that. So really excited for that.
Thank you so much for the support. You guys are awesome. I know you were in our first group of customers, so
I
thank
was like,
you.
yeah, yeah.
You're the best. I wish we had hikes in Florida. We have walks.
Yes, well, no, in Florida, I'm not gonna do. I'll take a walk anytime or swim, not a
Oh,
hike.
I'm jealous
Um,
of your topography, but thank you again for your support. That's
for
awesome.
sure, for sure. So, I mean, my story, it's kind of interesting. I never expected to be in this space. I grew up, I have a mixed background. I grew up coding. I spent most of my career working in healthcare and public health, and then, with biotech companies and, pharmaceutical companies, really thinking about how we can develop medicines to treat patients, right, and get those medicines to people who need them most. But then, I was looking to spend time with my daughter. She just, graduated from middle school. And, in a span of a month, she got interested. All of a sudden, it's like, we're buying dresses, we're thinking about makeup, dealing all this, with all this stuff. And really, as a parent, you always think that, okay, like I got things under control. I got things under control. And then, oof, like you turn a corner and then like, I got nothing under control.
Whoa,
So I
what
was
happened?
trying
Wait,
to, what's that?
she's a woman. What happened here?
Right, exactly. And so I've been trying to kind of figure that out and figure out my place in that as a dad, right? I obviously want to keep spending time with her and, do things together. So we started, learning more about, lip glosses, makeup, skin creams, all this stuff that all of a sudden she wanted to get. She was interested in, her and her friends are trading tips in school and all this stuff. I'm just trying to keep up. And out of curiosity, I started looking at the ingredient lists, and it didn't take long for me to figure out, like, holy cow, like a lot of this stuff is bad for anyone, but especially bad for young women who are developing, whose hormonal systems are developing, right, whose reproductive systems are developing. as well as, young boys as well, by the way. And it made me reflect on my own kind of journey, right? When I started using my first, deodorants and stuff like that. There are a lot of things that we didn't know back then. So,
Yeah.
we started, figuring out, okay, can we do it our own way? And we quickly Googled some DIY recipes and started doing things at home and making little lip balms and lip glosses and stuff like that, putting it into little kind of containers that she could bring into school and share with her friends. And it just kind of made me think, is there something here? And can we start something together? And so we started Blossom and Beam. She's my co-founder. She's the chief product officer. She's in charge of all the different things that, that make sense for this, whether or not it's actually going to be a product that people need or want. And I'm basically helping her realize that vision. So we're looking to create the cleanest possible products that are also environmentally sustainable, no single use plastics, no negative environmental impact, and really to demystify the whole makeup industry for other dads who are in similar position like me.
I love this. There's so much to unpack in this story, and there's so many similarities between obviously my story with my daughter, who's our co-founder as well. And I love that you give your daughter a part as like the chief product officer. Have you put on lip gloss yet? I just want to ask. So
There
much.
was a time, yes. So, yes, I'll
That's a
just
good
leave it at
sign.
that.
That's
Yes.
brilliant. I love it. That's amazing. You know what? Any secure man will wear lip gloss for their child, for
Hey,
their daughter.
anytime,
It's so cool.
anytime.
But one of the things that really strikes me, there's so much here, Vadim. This is why Monroe and I really enjoy your company and learning what you guys are doing is you are very intentional with the way that you're doing this as a way to bring you and your daughter closer together, as a way for you to teach her some of the foundational structures of life that you want to instill in her, some of the morals. And I just think that, we're all about parenting on purpose. So I think that is just incredible. If you don't mind, I know you and I chatted a lot, both in person and then before this call, about family optimization.
Yeah.
We're really big on just that intentionality. I would love to learn a little bit about the foundational pieces, or maybe some of the life skills that you're hoping that or morals that you're hoping that you wanted to instill in her through this journey, and then maybe what you've seen so far as you guys have developed this.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I love the family optimization. I'm going to credit you with that term because I think it's awesome. And maybe someday we'll have our own kind of category in Walmart or somewhere that's like the family optimization aisle. So I really love that. I think really, if I was to break it down, I'll break it down into two parts: the physical wellness and mental emotional wellness. Right. As I think about modern families, right, it kind of falls into one of those two buckets. And in health, I think for me as a parent, there's been a lot of more awareness into things that we put into our bodies and things that we give to our families, to our family members.
Right.
So, I spent a lot of time thinking about my own health since I was probably, in my mid 20s. If you met me in my mid 20s, I probably was in worse physical shape and worse mental shape by far than I am now. And I really didn't understand anything about nutrition. And I thought like I could go for a little bit of a run, but then I would come home and eat all sorts of like stuff that I thought salad dressing was good for you. Right. So there's a lot of education that I had to go through myself of figuring out, oh my God, like why does bread have sugar in it? Right. Like all this type of
Sure.
questions. And now that I educated myself a little bit on that, I try to think, how do I impart that, or help influence both my daughter but also my parents, because now I think we're at that point where I'm parenting a child, but I'm also, and I mean this in the best way possible, I'm also starting to parent my parents more than the other way around. And so I think a lot of how can I help them make informed choices being without it being it like top
Heavy.
down, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Man,
um
I just
yeah.
love that you go there because I think that's such an underserved part of the family unit. And when we think about at least I think about our family. Like my parents are such an integral part of our unit, and they're so supportive, and the Sunday dinners, and but as our parents age, and maybe if you're listening, maybe your parents are there, maybe they're not yet, but they do start to need some additional support, and they also very much like a teenager, very much want to feel autonomous, want to feel
Yeah.
important, want to feel like their experiences in life had value, and that's just such a great point. I love that. I love that you include that and that you're so mindful of it. I can learn a lot from that for sure.
No, thank you so much. I haven't figured it all out yet. If you do, let me know, and I'll definitely do the same. But the thing about health is that it's not just, I try to take a very much an engineer's mindset. I'm like, okay, we're going to isolate the problem, then we could solve it. But it really doesn't work like that, because all of that, it overlaps with lifestyle, it overlaps with culture, etc. Right? So there's a lot there, and I'm still trying to figure that out. I think the second part of that, that I mentioned is the emotional health, and I think this is really where we kind of overlook this in today's day and age. Although I hope there's going to be more awareness of it, but I really think that we're kind of living through a silent epidemic of loneliness, which I
Yeah.
know sounds like a lot, but I really think that we're across multiple generations, we're being separated more and more, and we're isolated more and more. And so even though it's the paradox of
Wow.
having more access to information and having more access to tools that connect us, ironically, we end up feeling more isolated than we ever have before, in a time where families used to live together in one unit,
Wow.
in ways that towns used to stay together, right? People wouldn't move around. um, so that's something that I'm thinking through a lot about as well, and thinking through how can we bring families closer again without it being like a top-down thing, like you have to do
Wow.
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
but really like think about the emotional health, because that's something, as someone who has worked in with medicines and public health,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not something you could put in a pill, right? That's not something you could put in an app. I really think that has to be a very bottoms up effort. But that to me is one of the things that I worry about over the next 10, 20 years socially, because I fear that as people get more socially isolated, that actually does have public health outcomes where,
Definitely.
there's all sorts of studies in, chronic diseases, mortality of like where people who don't have that social support actually experience a harder um, kind of health outcomes basically as they get older.
Yeah, one absolutely feeds the other. I think that's incredibly accurate. Wow, that's so crazy. It scares you, and then it also makes me really grateful that there's people like you who are focusing on that as a overarching vision to their company and how they want to use that to weave in, making a difference. One thing I teach my daughter when we decided to do this venture is like I don't want to just do this to make money. Like this, like I earnestly in my heart feel like we're at a bifurcation, and like there's going to be like the companies that just continue the way they always have, like money for money's sake, power, and then there's going to be the more conscious version of that break that are like really trying to push forward the change they want to see in the world. And like you, I wanted my daughter to gain life skills through this venture, and to also efficacy skills. Like I want her to go. I'm okay that she goes to college. I want her to go to college. I think it's a very fun experience. I don't want her to have to rely on college to think that I need to do one to get to the other. I want her to have a business that's bringing in passive income, and she can put it into rentals or whatever as she goes through college. So now she has the benefit of one, but she
Mhm.
doesn't rely on it as like this is my identity and I'm only good. Like I was talking to my nephew this weekend. It's like the SATs, and then there's this. Like there's always something in these kids' lives that they have to accomplish or get for them to feel value. And when I
Mhm.
reflect like you, we're also very reflective. Like think of like my 3-year-old, for example. Like they wake up, they get pushed to this, and they get pushed to this, and they're pushed to school, and they're pushed here. It's very like to your point. There's not a lot of time for them to like regulate all this stuff they have going on. So to kind of bring that back, I, like you, am very intentional that I want her to have some core values coming through this. And one of those is You don't have to profit um, by degrading something else. You can
Mhm.
find the common link that's going to enhance all pieces, and 2 + 2 = 3 synergy kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what we've decided to do in our brand is, like you, we use only sustainable sourcing material. And then we're also giving a portion of the proceeds of everything we get away to organizations that benefit kids.
Yeah.
It's that tithing. It's that, as you don't have to get to a certain place to then help. You can do it at the same time. So those are some of the core fundamentals. But then there's also the tactical stuff about business, right? Like, um, getting a social following, the P&L statements. What are you bringing in versus you bringing out, the logistics. Just those small things are so eye opening for a kid, and their brains are wired to like bring all
Yeah.
this stuff in, right? Um, so I think entrepreneurialism is so cool. I know they're starting to teach it in colleges. My nephew and I were just talking about that because he's going through his college application process, but also just doing it with your kids, like failing
Yeah.
forward so that your kids can work through those belief barriers so that when they're adults, they don't have them. And it's super important.
100%. I think what you're doing is spot on. I think a lot about the same exact things, and um, same things that I communicated to my daughter as well, because I want her to know how to fish, and I don't want her to be. There's a phrase like living paycheck to paycheck. What I see when people are successful professionally, they have the luxury of not living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe they have a little bit of savings saved up, but they're still living job to job, meaning that if they lose a job, if they're part of a layoff, etc., maybe they have a few months where they can take a breather, right? Which is fantastic, and that's in itself a luxury that most people don't have in this world. But after that, eventually they have to go and get another job, right? And what I would love to teach my daughter is to be able to say that, look, I can be self-sufficient, and if I want that corporate job, and if I find a company that where the mission is aligned to what I want to do, or I'm learning critical skills there, by all means, right? But know that there's also a different way of doing it, that you can fish for yourself and also empower other people to do that, which I think is in all the kind of entrepreneurial circles, right? Not in all of them you really talk about that, right? There's, you can make a few bucks on the side, but what you're doing really is, if you open up your own restaurant, or if you buy a business, right? Or if you start your own business, you're actually bringing hopefully value into other people's lives. And that, I think, is really powerful to teach a child, to see that you could be an agent of change in other people's life. That's a positive thing.
The first time I've ever heard that concept, weirdly enough, was in like the acting world, where there
Mm,
would be like good actors or actresses, and they would go into parts and say like, "Here's the script, here's the part I want." But if you don't pick me, or if you don't do this, I'm walking away with it, and I don't need this money.
mhm,
Like, however you feel about certain political parties, I really respected that about Trump. He's like, look, I don't need your money as a affiliate. This
mhm,
is what I'm coming in with. I'm self funded, and here's the change I want to make. Right, like regardless of
mhm,
what you feel. I thought that was very admirable, and it
yep,
teaches children to serve, have a servant's heart. It's that, now this is definitely not in the same political vein as that last statement, but this is it's like you show up to serve, and by doing so you're creating, like you said, you're creating an agent that you can benefit from, but so can other people.
yeah,
There's also like a kind of a spiritual component to that. Like when you start something for a need, like I need this, I just feel like you don't have the same totality, or maybe you don't show up as whole because you're in like a limited mind frame of reality. Like you're kind of like very focused in on what you don't have or what you're trying to get for your benefit. But when you really show up to listen and to serve, I know in our own journey through talking to our customers, it's really helped us to understand like what type of packaging, a
mhm,
resealable, like something as simple as a resealable pouch. People are like, I throw away so much. It's so frustrating. I really didn't understand how people shared my frustration. I thought I was like the only person. I buy all this stuff and then like I'm giving it away or giving it to food banks, and it's just because resealable. Like how hard is that? So that part's been really cool. But seeing my daughter learn that stuff has been even more amazing. And then watching her take those applications and use them in life, that was so cool. I really enjoyed that too. It's fun to watch them, right, develop as little people.
Because I think this is all like what we're, I think if done right, right, all of this stuff is the how we're hardwired in the beginning. You know what I mean? Like it's the more, not like living in a way, in like in a scarcity mindset where it's like I'm gonna take this because so that you don't have it, right? Or like I'm gonna take what's mine. To me, that's more unnatural, right? I think kids, I don't know, maybe this is naive, right? But I think kids have more of an abundant mindset in
Hmm.
the beginning and
Yeah.
are taught the scarcity mindset as they grow up, maybe from their parents or just communities, or life experiences. But I think there's something childlike in that approach of abundance, to say that I'm going to put something out into the world. I'm not going to take. I'm going to create something that's going to be kind of self-sustaining and be positive for other people. Not that I'm going to take something so that I could buy a new car, or that I could get a new set of clothes.
I feel like parents can learn so much from children. Like if you you watch a kid, like I have a 3 year old and a 15-year old, but kids like to create, especially up until their teenage years, and now they're the paradigm of reality is starting to like solidify around them. But creation is fun. It's not creating for a profit. It's creating to express your unique disposition, your unique perspective, just to use what you have to make something. And when we get into this crazy, we learn through school and jobs and college and all that stuff to now trade time for money, and we put the finite value on something that is really invaluable. You cannot put a price tag on it, yet we let them. My cousin is a Broadway dancer, and she now owns a studio, and she very health minded, has a lot of health people that follow her for this reason. She posted this something I loved the other day. It was about water. It's like water is something that is a free resource by and large, right? But when you go to the grocery store, it's $2. When you go to the airport, it's $5. When you go to a concert, it's $10. What changes? Is it the contents of the water? No, it's like a value you're placing on it. And then there was a tie-in to like how do you value yourself? And
Mm.
I really love that, especially for young children, because you can only be given the value that people place upon you. And if you're like, this is not the container, I'm not choosing to have that
Mm.
value, you are an invaluable resource. So I say all that, but what I learned from watching kids create is that adults, we're just like disorganized, or not, like we're just like kids who have like lost our way, but we still like to create. That's why we're going out to do the thing, build the
Mhm.
business, create the gym, make the podcast, write the blog. It's that same innate desire to express oneself. So instead of using it as like a way to separate ourselves from our children, if we can come in alignment and create, I think there's so much more in common there. And those are the things that cost nothing,
Yeah,
and don't, maybe they don't make you a profit, but goodness, do they make you a more happy and pleasurable human being? And in my mind, when you have that alignment, you're going to go out and make more money. You're going to go out and do the thing because you have the confidence and you have the fun and you have the full heart, and you're not in that limited perspective.
exactly. You're not looking over your back, because there's no wrong answer in that type of scenario. I completely agree. I think that's one of the things I wish growing up they taught. I think this is maybe changing now, but I wish they would have taught business as a creative art, right?
Oh,
Because it was, when I was growing up, it's like always, and I was into creative stuff, right? I used to paint. My dream was to be a writer, right? So for me, it was always like, okay, there's the creative stuff here, and then there's business stuff, right? Because I wanted to do all that, but also my dream was, I'm gonna start, because I was into tech. And growing up, I'm like, okay, I want to be the next like Steve Jobs, right? As everyone would. And I could never quite reconcile the two things, because I'm like, well, if I want to do business, I have to give up all this other creative stuff that I love to do. And it took me a really long, I only just recently figured it out that it's actually part of the same thing. And it all comes from the same place. And the people for whom it's a creative pursuit, those are the ones, as you're saying, like are the most successful,
yeah.
ironically, right?
They figured it out, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, this is why, this is why I kind of like to break the paradigm. Like my daughter is in a private homeschool situation
Yeah.
because every kid unique, every situation unique, right? But for her, what I recognize is she's so special. She's hearing me, by the way. She's making lunch, so I love you. She's so special and she's so unique. I do not want her to try and fit in a box. She's not
Yeah.
meant to fit in a box. And if she tries and she succeeds, she just has lost something that it'll take her 20 years to try and regain, which is kind of what you and I are going through, that self discovery of. But if as parents, if we just have a little bit more awareness, and it doesn't mean take your kid out of school or make an extreme measure, it can just be like having a conversation with them or engaging in something they enjoy. You can just break that paradigm for them a little bit, for them to keep that. You just save them 20 years when they're older. They don't have to redo that work. And like again, I'm very, very grateful for our generation before us and what they were able to do. They were doing the best they can. But I think it's our plight to do better. We have it's Maslow's hierarchy, right? We're at the
Yeah.
top of that triangle. So now we have the responsibility to use what we have and not just go buy crap, but make the world a better place because of it. I think that's important. I did want to shift gears for a second and talk about the underserved population of fathers and what
Yeah.
type of change you're trying to drive there, because I think that is incredibly unique. And it is also something I'm seeing on a lot of people's hearts. A lot of very talented men like you who've been coming into our awareness and space recently and on our show are making similar changes. So
Mm.
I just think that's awesome. Like, just it's like the hero of the family unit, like stepping up. It like makes my heart so happy. Please speak on that a little bit, like what you notice, what type of change you're trying to drive. Anything would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks so much for that. How much time do we have? I could talk
Yeah.
about this for like a week.
Yeah. No. Just yeah. Whatever's on your heart. We're good. We're gonna.
No, no. So I mean, this is a topic that's very near and dear to me. I spent a lot of time thinking about how, well, one, recognizing the unmet need, both physical and emotional, for men, especially as they get older, and going back to what I mentioned earlier about emotional health and feeling isolation.
So good.
And also how to help them be more connected and present with the people around them, right? And that includes friends and family, from different areas of life. Um, as so, I'm a single dad, and I'm fortunate. I say that, recognize that I'm actually fortunate to have a very awesome and healthy relationship with my daughter's mom and their family, and I think we co-parent in a really nice way. But as a single dad, I try to figure out, one, how can I be more as connected with my daughter as I can be, especially when we don't see each other. But also, I've, been on this journey for a while, and, I've spoken to a lot of other dads who are in different points of their journey, a lot of single dads, and I recognize how difficult that journey can be, and how isolated men feel in that journey, especially when they're parenting by themselves, especially when they're trying to reboot their life, after being married for 20 years or so, right? And so that to me is, again, I feel like it's almost like, and I think we've talked about this before, really called this the silent epidemic of men in general, whether or not they're single dads or not, where I feel like in today's society, men in
Yeah.
particular are growing more isolated and more alone, um, emotionally, and I feel like that is a really unmet need. And so I've been thinking for a very long time of how do we address this again? How do we do this in a healthy bottoms up way, not in a top down way?
Love this.
And that's actually where the idea for Blossom and Beam came out, because ironically, instead of giving men a product like, hey, here's a new shaving cream, here's an axe, here's like a new pair of boots, let's make this fun and let's help men reconnect with their daughters. Let's
Love
help
this.
men be the best dads that they can be. And let's change the conversation about cosmetics in general by bringing in a whole new population segment really in it, like if we want to get our business hat on, right? But really it's about kind of helping, like serving men, and especially the single dads who like me have awesome daughters that they want to raise to be the next generation of amazing women, and how can we give them the tools to do that? uh, so yeah, so that's kind of the, yeah, that's
It's like instead of giving them a product, you're giving them a purpose. You're giving them an
Yes.
area to engage and be the divine masculine for their daughter and help educate them. I think that's so good. It's so interesting. This, I don't know what this is even called. I know it's going to be a huge topic. You're very insightful with you. I really enjoy talking with you. I know Monroe and I feel the exact same way. Your whole thing on like the mental health, where we're going, how we used to be like a very communal society. We used to live in tight quarters. It used to take, it takes a village, right? And
Yeah.
anybody in a nuclear type family where it's like four walls and just a family, or in whatever number of people that is, they'll tell you like it's challenging to raise a kid with just a mom and dad. When our parents come over, like that perspective of aunts and uncles and grandparents is, it's just so much more forgiving and chill and allows more flow. So I so agree with you on everything you're saying. And I think that it's going to be interesting to watch over the next 10, 15 years as these things come to the forefront. But to the underserved male population component of it. Like my husband and I talk about this is the weirdest stuff that we talk about, but it's probably why we have such a great friendship. But I think society has started to like demasculize, emasculize, I don't know the right word, men in a lot of ways. Like it was all about like empowering women to be as good as men and X, Y, and Z. And there's nothing wrong with anybody reaching their full potential. But in doing so, I know in our own relationship and marriage, just be honest, we have to work very, very hard to make sure that he gets to be the leader and have the voice because we're both very assertive. We're both out to make a lot of change in this world. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of times where I feel like, okay, maybe that's not the decision I would make, but that's okay because he needs to have that space that's his creative space. And if
Hmm.
I don't give him the space to do that, like I'll give you an example and then we can move on. But I've really had to relearn what femininity means, right? As a woman growing up, it was very much like tied to how your body looks and the way people react to you, and then your potency in terms of what you can go out and get from the world. And unfortunately, like there's a very big missing piece to that. Was when you think of like femininity in general, it's like the womb where the creation comes from. And now
Hmm.
I understand that through my silence, and this is not like a diminutive silence, like this
Yeah.
is a chosen through me allowing my daughter, my son, my husband to stand on their own and not have to overbear. I am allowing that creation to come through. And it's incredible when I do that, the self-reflection I get from it and what happens. Like in a lot of cases, if I don't interject in my children with what I think they're going to, because like I want to correct them. And what I'm realizing is if I just listen and
Hmm.
allow, they are doing the best they can and their true intentions come out and then I learn something from it. And it's very
Hmm.
similar with the family dynamic with the masculine thing. So we talk about it a lot and it's so cool to hear that there are other mindful people out there that understand that it's very prevalent in our society, and even cooler that you're using it to give men a platform to kind of speak. I really hope you create some kind of community where these gentlemen can get together and really like be dads and talk about that and the struggles, because I think you're right. There's going to be lots to unpack there and a lot of healing. And by healing them, you're really helping the next generation who comes through them, right?
Absolutely. And I think there's so much that you said that, we can unpack and so rich. But it's really, what you mentioned about masculinity and femininity and how we balance that in our households. How do we balance that as a society? I think to be, I guess, kind to ourselves, I think where we are now, we have to recognize that we're in a different place than maybe our parents were, than our grandparents were. And really, we don't have a playbook for how to operate as men and women in today's day and age. I think a lot of things have happened over the past 50 years that were super positive, right? As a father of a daughter, I'm so glad that she's being raised in 2023 and not
Yeah.
1953. But that being said, right, I think we I think there's a lot of potential to also make sure that kind of the dialogue remains open, right, between men and women, between all of us as a society. And this is, kind of something I think about as well, where we're constantly now, we're so polarized, everything is so politicized.
Yeah.
And I think we all do ourselves a disservice through that because we don't have a conversation. We just have a shouting match. And then, I think there's a lot to say that you could have You could recognize men in families. You could recognize men in society. You can empower men without disempowering women. And I
Yeah.
think that it feels like that's a controversial thing to say. But I think there's a lot there, and it could be done in a healthy way. That's kind of, at least that's the hope.
It's amazing. When I got pregnant with Gabriel, I started to look up, and then again when I was starting this brand with Shekinah, we started to look up different cultures and different not just places in our world now geographically, but like different times and like how they raise kids and to what purpose. And what really was like clear is like we are struggling as parents. Like we have this identity crisis now that we're parents. Like what happens to us? Like I don't know if it's the rose-colored glasses, but I feel like when we look back on other generations, or when I talk to my mom or my aunts and uncles, I talk to my grandparents, or second or third uncles and aunts, and we learn like their problems were so different than ours. Ours are so mental. We have the needs physically met, and it doesn't necessarily mean our lives are easier or better. It actually is almost a higher level challenge that requires a higher level of thinking to work through. But to your point, which is so eloquently said as always, this is where we are. This is where we find ourselves. And so, how do we, as a society, do that in a graceful way that can be playful and fun? And I think even just having conversations like this, or just listening to it, you're already starting to heal that divide just by giving men a way to say, wow, this is very easy to just talk about conversationally. Because I think women want to hear it. I know when my husband comes to me with these things, I want to know so I can learn to love him better. It's not a
Mhm.
confrontational component. It's a how do we serve each other, and you have to. And that's just not even a spouse thing. That happens with your children, and um, sometimes being vulnerable. Like if I'm really frustrated, I'll break down and crying sometimes. I'm like, I just feel like I'm failing you and I don't know what to do. And I don't want to result to screaming at you.
Mhm.
So I don't know. And then in that moment, they go from whatever their state of anger or upsetness to just empathy. And it's just, wow. It's like, that was different than I thought I had to do, but the result was way better. It's crazy.
But that's, you just touched, I think, in the beginning when we were, just chatting before this. You mentioned like if I had a piece of advice or something like that, and I scribbled down empathy, because that was really, I think, what a lot comes down to. And again, in this hyper wired, reactive world that we live in, I think sometimes we lose the empathy part.
Wow. That's
And
beautiful.
that, might sound a little trite, but I think that's what we need more of.
No, I think it's great. I love it. Um, Before we wrap, there's one other thing I wanted to touch on, and I think it's always interesting and fun just to learn from different people's perspectives, whether that's like the dad thing, your family role, or where you come from, or your what industry that you serve. So you talk a lot about your parents, and I know in conversations past, it's near and dear to your heart. Like, what are some of the things that you have done to help with your daughter and your parents maybe having a good connection, or just that older golden generation in general, to help keep them top of mind and in your heart? Because I think, as we stated earlier, I just think that's something that's really missing, and I'd love to hear your
Yeah.
perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean that's such a great question, and just I'll say I haven't really figured. I'm still figuring it out as we speak, because I'm a first generation immigrant, right? So my family came from Ukraine when I was still my daughter's age, actually.
Wow.
So I grew up here in New York, in the U.S. My parents assimilated, I think pretty well to the U.S. Um, but there's still that not there's different divides, or like different points of like where they remember their childhood, they remember my childhood, and now they're seeing my daughter's childhood. So some of it is somewhat comically, the typical immigrant stuff, like, oh, when I was your age I had to walk 50 miles to get to the school, and now you're like, you take
In
a
the
train or
Prius.
you get a
Yeah.
drive, right? Some of it is more like emotional, of kind of my daughter now is a kid who's been growing up in 2023. She rightfully so, feels that she has the right to express herself, or, and I encourage her to express her opinions. My parents or grandparents may, not sometimes are like, oh, wow, like, it would never occur to us that a 10-year-old can just like say like, no, you're wrong, grandfather, right?
Yeah.
So that's always an interesting conversation. I think so. Part of it is culture, part of it is language. My daughter is trying to relearn, to speak Russian. So, she has Duolingo, and, so she's practicing more with her grandparents. So
That's awesome.
I think time spent together. I think I say all this like very cerebral stuff just now that I rattled off, but like now that I think of it, it's really about time spent together. And because my parents, we're not living in the same, like I mentioned earlier, we're not in the one household, right? Fortunately, we're in one tri-state area, so we could take a hour drive or so. But still, like when you think about it, we only see each other a handful of times in the year, and that I think that could be better. Let's just say it that way. And I think that's really what it comes down to. It's not about, hey, here's a new framework for engaging between a daughter and a grandparent, right? It's really about like, hey, how can we just co-locate and spend time together? And I realize that's really tough these days
Yeah.
because everyone is living apart. But I think that's really what it comes down to, because then you have the empathy and you have the emotional connection without having to verbalize it, without having like fancy words for it. You're just there, you're living together, you're seeing each other through different life stages, and you're just connected.
To your point earlier, right? It's not a top down, or it's not like a forced approach.
Yeah.
It's very organic. It makes me think too about what you said with everyone just feeling very isolated. Like I especially think about that generation, especially if they're older and like a spouse has passed on and they're home so often and they're just, whatever that is for them, TV or knitting or like whatever insert hobby. And it kind of breaks my heart to think about that. And then you have the teenage and the preteen and the children population who could so benefit from that time. And I think you nailed it with quality. It's just quality time without a phone. Like
Hmm.
just, walking on the, like, kids and grandparents tend to have very similar like cadences and
Mm.
like just allowing them to see that. I just feel in general that connection piece would help so much with the empathy without having to like force it, just to understand someone's perspective because you did a puzzle together or because you played bingo or shuffleboard or you took a walk and you talked about the birds and whatever that is. Man, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I want to do a much better job. um,
That's yeah, for I think like me and you, right? Like I think about that a lot, and I feel like I always wish I could have done more, right? When I was, growing up with my, I was fortunate to have grandparents and two great grandmothers who lived to like very old age, but I wish, we could have done more, being there, for each other. I think it's hard these days, right? And I think that's one of those things that we have to change.
I was just chatting with an entrepreneur and a coach, and he has a foundation called 18 Summers. And
Mm.
he mentioned that statistically, 85, this is heart wrenching. Just hearing it makes me want to cry. 85% of the time you'll ever spend with your children is done after their 18th summer. The rest of that time is bits and pieces here and there for the rest, 18 plus years. It's 80 something years. And in that
Man,
time, you're
now I'm gonna go cry.
and then I think about our grandparents too, with that,
Yeah.
they're living proof of that, right? Like we see them a few times, we see our parents a few times a year. We see our
Yeah.
grandparents once, I see my parents every week or so, but my grandparents 2 or 3 times a year. That's why, like, we're running and we're building these organizations and we're building these skyscrapers, and it's like because we don't feel fulfilled, and then there's fulfillment's right in front of us. So
Mm.
I really appreciate this conversation because it has caused me to pause and really reflect, and I'm looking forward to putting some changes into my own life to just bring that real connection back, because I think once you do that, everything else just happens much more naturally. It's beautiful.
And I think to draw this full circle, right, to entrepreneurship and what we're doing, and family optimization, all of that. I think that's the beautiful thing about creating your own company versus working for, like having a big corporate job, in that you can actually, let me see if I can verbalize this. You can form the change through something that's more sustainable. And like think about, mighty morsels, right? You like think about what brings families together. Food is a huge one, right?
Especially in our cultures.
Right, exactly. So if you're thinking like of different, so food could be one, right? I don't know, maybe makeup or like DIY activities could be another. Um, but it's really kind of thinking through, I guess what I was trying to say is that through entrepreneurship, it gives you more agency over
Agency.
how you build your life and how you hopefully surround yourself with family or things like that. So I guess more than just like you're working for someone else and you have less agency over your own time, over your own location, etc.
I love that. And I would
Yeah.
make that synonymous with resourcefulness. You
Yeah.
have developed, or they used to say the kids cut their teeth. I feel like that there's not a better analogy for entrepreneurs, because it feels like you're trying to break through skin the entire time you're doing this. But it's like you're cutting out these skills, and now that you have them in one area, you can choose to use them for good and you apply them in other areas of your life.
Mm,
So I think those are incredible things to teach our kids, even if you are a teacher, even if you're a public servant and you work at the firehouse. Vadim and I both have a great friend that's a firefighter who's also an incredible entrepreneur, and his children are going to get the benefit of both of those things.
yeah.
But it's just showing. I took notes at the conference that we were at, and one thing I took away was, if you fail forward in front of your children and you work through your limiting beliefs, you're ensuring your children don't have them. And
Mm.
I love that. That was like, damn, so good for me. Um, I love that. So, Vadim, I would love for you to tell us how people can get involved in your world, how they can become a customer of Blossom and Beam. I know you have some a newer line that's going to be released in the next few months. How do they get on a waiting list for those? Tell everyone where they can find you. I am on the top of that list. I want to try and give them to Shekinah as well. How can we all get involved?
Thank you so much. No, that's very generous. I think really simple for now because we're we're just getting started. So they can go to blossombeam.com. So just two words, blossombeam.com. And there's an area there where they can drop their email, and then they'll be on the email list, and we'll be sure to update them as we develop the new, batch of products.
Yeah, exciting. Okay, I'm gonna go do that right now. I'll also put that in the link below, so we can be in the first round. And I'm so excited. Please keep us abreast of your progress, and let us know if there's anything we can do to support you. This was awesome. Parents, I just want to tell you thank you so much for being here. I'm so motivated by you guys and the notes that we get, and just proud of us as a community and the change that our children are going to have because we're mindful. So thank you guys for being present. Thank you for showing up every day for yourselves, and just remember to have fun, right? Your kids look to you for a lot of things, but I think the most important thing is just to have fun and play with them. And with nothing else, you have succeeded. And it's a lot more fun for us too, and you guys deserve it because you're awesome people. So again, thanks for being here. Until the next perfect time, stay beautiful and stay inspired. Bye, guys.